Emily Carter's father did not just leave her and her mother. He made them the reason he had to go. When Emily was 12 years old, that sentence had not yet taken shape clearly in her mind. It had not yet become something sharp enough for her to hold as evidence or as a weapon. But that night in Portland, as the winter rain fell softly beyond the dining room window, as each drop slid down the glass in long streaks like someone was quietly drawing a curtain over a different life, her body understood before her mind did that some departures begin long before the moment someone walks out the door. On the oak table lay a white envelope from a law office, a black ink pen placed neatly beside it, and Daniel Carter's cup of coffee, gone so cold that a thin, dull sheen had formed across the surface. The mug said, "World's okayest dad," a gift Emily had once bought with money she had saved from a school fair after seeing Daniel laugh at it in a store and say he was not good enough to deserve a best dad mug. When she gave it to him, he had hugged her, kissed the top of her head, and told her he liked it more than anything expensive because it felt more like the two of them. Now the mug sat beside the white envelope, like a joke that had stopped being funny. The stew on the stove was still hot. The wall clock still ticked with its steady little sound. Laura Carter, Emily's mother, sat beside her with both hands resting in her lap, her fingers clasped so tightly they had gone white, her face pale beneath the yellow light, but she did not cry. Daniel sat across from them, his pale blue shirt smooth, his hair combed, his shoulders straight, as if he were attending an important meeting instead of cutting his wife and daughter's life in half. He did not yell. He did not slam his hand on the table. He did not say he loved someone else more. If he had, maybe Emily could have hated him more easily. But Daniel spoke in a calm, tired voice, like a man who had endured too much and was only trying, that night, to share a difficult truth the others needed to learn how to accept. He said he had tried for a very long time. He said the house had become too heavy, too cold, too full of tension. He said he did not want anyone to be hurt, but a person could not keep dying inside just to preserve the appearance of a family. He said he needed peace. He needed to breathe. Those sentences fell onto the dinner table cleanly, sadly, maturely enough that anyone who argued against them would immediately look like someone unable to feel compassion for a man in pain. Emily did not understand all of it, but she heard what was hidden underneath. Her father was not saying, "I betrayed you." He was saying, "This house suffocated me." He was not saying, "I chose to leave." He was saying, "I had no choice." He was not saying, "I signed before I told you." He was placing the envelope on the table and using his wounded voice to turn that fact into something unfortunate rather than something planned. He said he did not want Emily to think this was her fault, but right after that, he said the house had become too heavy, too cold, too impossible to live in. And a child only has to hear something like that once to start wondering where the blame belongs, if not with the people still sitting inside that house. Emily looked at the envelope, at the pen, at the cold mug, and asked very quietly, "Did you already sign it?" Daniel was silent for a beat. Laura closed her eyes. The silence answered everything. Emily did not understand divorce law, custody arrangements, visitation schedules, or division of assets. But she understood that a signature was something people put down after they had already decided. Daniel had decided before she was asked, before Laura was allowed to cry, before dinner had even gone cold, before the house knew it had been condemned. He reached across the table as if to touch her, but Emily pulled back before she could think. His expression changed very little, only a small flicker of pain crossing his face, left there like evidence that she was hurting him too. "I know you're angry," he said softly, "but one day you'll understand how hard I tried." That was the first of many sentences that would follow her for years, because it did not ask for forgiveness. It gave her a future debt. One day she would have to understand. One day she would have to look at his leaving through his eyes. One day, if she was still hurt, it would mean she had not grown up enough. Laura still did not cry. Emily looked at her mother, waiting for her to stand, waiting for her to throw the mug at the wall, waiting for her to ask Daniel what right he had to say this house suffocated him when he was the one who had carried cold air into every room. But Laura only sat there, her face bloodless, her jaw tightened just enough for a small vein to rise along her neck. Years later, Emily would understand that some people do not cry not because they are not breaking, but because if they start, they will no longer have enough hands to keep the child beside them from breaking too. That night, all she saw was her mother silent, her father speaking, the envelope on the table, and a story already built before she even knew she needed to defend herself. In the months before the night of the white envelope, The Carter house had changed color so slowly that Emily did not know it was the color of leaving. Looking back, she could see each shade of it clearly, like stains beneath old paint. Daniel started coming home late, first at 6:30 instead of 6:15, then 7, then 8. And then there were nights when he opened the door after Emily had already brushed her teeth and was standing in the hallway in her pajamas, holding a picture book she was too old for but still kept because it was the book Daniel used to read. Add to her, he would smile at her with that tired smile, pat her head and say, "Tomorrow you and I will talk, Em. I'm too tired tonight." Tomorrow became a room that never opened. One week, he forgot to pick her up after art class. Emily stood under the school awning, her backpack heavy on her shoulders, watching one parent's car after another arrive and leave, the rain speckling the purple canvas shoes she had begged for at the start of the school year. She tried to believe he was stuck in traffic, tried to believe his phone had died, tried to believe there had been an emergency. By the time her teacher had to call Laura, her mother rushed in wearing an unbuttoned coat, her hair still wet because she had been interrupted mid-shower, her face full of fear and guilt, even though she was not the one who had forgot. That night, when Laura asked Daniel why he had not answered his phone, he rubbed the bridge of his nose and exhaled like a man dragged into an unfair interrogation. "I told you my phone died. What do you want me to do? Turn back time?" Laura said he had made a promise to their daughter. Daniel looked at Emily, his eyes sad and soft enough that she hated the part of herself that still wanted to run toward him. "You know I didn't mean to, right?" he asked. Emily nodded, not because she understood, because a child chosen by her father to witness his innocence can easily confuse being chosen with being loved. From that day on, whenever Daniel did something wrong in a small way, he did not apologize by placing responsibility on the floor where it belonged. He pulled Emily into the space between himself and Laura, turning her into a mirror that reflected what he wanted to see, that he was still a good father, and that Laura was the one making everything heavy. He began sitting out on the porch to take phone calls, even when it was cold, his voice lower and softer than the one he used inside the house. Some nights, Emily came downstairs for water and saw him through the gap in the curtain, standing beneath the porch roof, one hand in his pocket, one hand holding the phone, his head slightly bowed, his mouth curved in a faint smile, the kind he no longer used when Laura talked about the office or when Emily showed him a good test grade. When Laura asked who he was talking to, Daniel said Marion was just a friend from the church fundraiser committee, someone going through a difficult time. Laura said a friend did not need to be called at 11 at night in that voice. Daniel set the phone down on the table very slowly, like a man trying to stay calm in the face of absurdity. "Do you hear yourself, Laura? I can't have one private conversation without you turning it into evidence. I just need to breathe." That phrase began appearing more and more, like a key he used to open every door out of accountability. Needed to breathe, needed space, needed peace. If Laura asked about the restaurant receipt from Beaverton, he needed to breathe. If she asked why his shirt smelled like unfamiliar perfume, he needed space. If she stayed silent through dinner because she was exhausted, he said that silence was exactly what made the house cold. Once Emily stood at the foot of the stairs, a glass of water in her hand, and heard him speaking to Aunt Karen in the garage. "I don't feel respected in my own home anymore. Laura is cold, Karen, cold in a way people on the outside don't see. But every day I feel like I'm dying in there. Emily has pulled away from me too. I try with her, but Laura put her on her side a long time ago." Emily did not move. The water in the glass chilled in her hand. She had pulled away because he had pulled away first, because he came home late, because he forgot to pick her up, because he spoke on the porch in a tender voice to someone who was not her mother. But in Daniel's story, that distance became a trait of hers, a piece of evidence against the old house. He did not need to invent everything. He only needed to take the right piece of truth, cut away the cause, and arrange it into a picture where he was the sorrowful man pushed outside. The paper in his coat pocket appeared the same way. Not a long love letter, not an explosive piece of proof, only a receipt from a restaurant in Beaverton, 2 desserts, and a handwritten line on the back in blue ink. "Thank you for listening." Laura stood in the laundry room for a long time with that paper, the dryer turning behind her, the metal buttons clicking steadily. She did not cry. She did not throw anything. She only folded the paper and tucked it into her own pocket, then continued moving clothes into the dryer with movements that were too careful. When Daniel was confronted, he did not confess the way a person caught should confess. He said Marion was a friend, that she was going through something difficult, that she knew how to listen without turning everything into confrontation. "I haven't done anything shameful," he said, and when Laura told him he had taken another woman to dinner and hidden it, he answered that he had not hidden it, he had only avoided this reaction. Emily did not yet know what to call that kind of speech, but she could hear that Daniel's greatest skill was not lying outright. It was pulling attention away from his action and placing it on the wounded person's response. It was not that he was sneaking around. It was that Laura was suspicious. It was not that he was lying. It was that he had to avoid a reaction. It was not that he was choosing another family. It was that the old house was suffocating him. Even before he left, he had already made Emily and her mother live inside the draft of his story, where every pain they felt had been prepared to become evidence that he was right. After the night of the divorce envelope, Daniel left quickly and neatly, and that neatness was a wound all by itself. There was no scene of a suitcase falling over, no door slamming, no neighbors peering through curtains. He packed his things on a Saturday morning while Emily was at piano lessons, and Laura was doing extra work at the accounting office. Emily remembered that lesson because she kept making mistakes in the middle of Für Elise, her fingers stiff on the keys, and when her teacher asked if anything was wrong, Emily said no, because in the Carter house, saying no was becoming the only way to keep everything from falling. When she came home, Daniel's side of the closet was half empty, the hangers still swaying faintly as if clothes had just been pulled from them. His toothbrush was gone from the bathroom cup. His nightstand drawer held only old receipts, a dead pen, a watch battery, and a bent paperclip. The world's okayest dad mug sat in the sink, a ring of dried coffee staining the inside. He had not taken it. Emily hated him then for leaving it behind, then hated herself because afterward she washed it clean and placed it on the highest shelf like a relic of someone who had not died. In those first weeks, Daniel called more often, but the calls sounded more like image management updates than a father missing his child. He asked if Emily had eaten, how school was, whether she was helping her mother, then usually said, "I know this is hard, but I hope you won't let sadness turn into bitterness. I just want peace for everyone." Peace for everyone meant Emily was not allowed to ask questions that made him uncomfortable. It meant Laura was not allowed to tell the truth in a way that made him look bad. It meant their relatives heard his version of how he had tried before they heard the breathing of the two people who stayed. Daniel did not disappear from the community. He still went to church, still attended fundraisers, still helped an old neighbor repair a fence, still answered Corinne's messages, still appeared at family gatherings as a sad but decent man. He told friends he did not want to speak badly of Laura, but the marriage had been dead for years. He told Corinne he was afraid Emily had been placed in the middle, even though he was the one speaking to every adult in her life and shaping her into a distant child influenced by her mother. He told the pastor he had prayed deeply before deciding that he was not proud, but people were not born to live inside a house without grace. Those sentences spread slowly, gently like smoke. No one came to the Carter house and asked Laura what had happened with a question wide enough for the truth to step into. They only called to say they were praying for her. Prayer can be kindness, but for Laura, it often sounded like a verdict covered in lace. Only a few months later, the first photo appeared on Facebook through a relative's post. Daniel stood in a brighter living room than the old one, beside Marion and her two children, Sophie and Ben. Sophie was Emily's age, dark blonde hair, wearing a blue dress, seated in front of a piano after a small recital, and Daniel stood behind her with one hand resting on her shoulder, his smile so tender that Emily looked at the photo and felt as if she had been slapped by something soft. Marion's caption read, "Grateful for peace, laughter, and second chances." Emily stared at the photo on the old computer in her bedroom, the screen tinted slightly blue, while behind her still hung a picture of herself at 8 years old sitting on Daniel's shoulders at Cannon Beach, both of them laughing so hard their eyes had almost disappeared in the wind. Her father had not vanished from the world. He had only moved into another frame, one where he smiled better, stood straighter, and rested his hand on another girl's shoulder as if he had never left his own daughter waiting under a school awning in the rain. Laura saw the photo when Emily forgot to close the screen. She stood behind her daughter's chair, silent long enough for Emily to know she had read the caption too. Emily turned, waiting for something, a curse, a confession, a piece of truth. Laura only placed a hand on her shoulder and said, "Turn it off, sweetheart. Things like that aren't good for the heart." Emily shoved her hand away. "Aren't you angry?" Laura looked at her with exhausted eyes. "I am. Then why don't you say anything?" Laura looked at the screen again, at Daniel in the light of someone else's living room. Because if I start talking, I'm afraid you'll have to grow up inside that voice of mine. Emily did not understand. To her, Laura's silence was not protection. It was a dark room where all her questions grew mold. If no one said what Daniel had done, then maybe what he said was true. Maybe Laura was cold. Maybe the old house was heavy. Maybe Emily really was distant. Maybe Sophie played piano better, smiled brighter, knew how to make Daniel feel needed. A child who is not given the truth will often invent an accusation to fill the empty space. And that accusation rarely points at the person with the most power. It points at the child herself. Daniel's Sunday calls became a ritual that deepened the wound week by week. He called at 7 in the evening, usually after dinner with his new family. Emily knew because she could hear Marion clearing dishes, or Ben calling for him from the living room. "I'm calling Emily," Daniel would say, just loud enough for the others to hear him doing his duty. He asked about her grades, school, whether she still drew. And then very quickly the conversation slid towards Sophie winning a piano competition, Ben scoring a goal, Marion finding a wonderful lasagna recipe, their weekend at the coast even though it had rained. He did not seem openly cruel. That was what made Emily unsure whether she was allowed to hurt. Was a father sharing stories about his new life hurting his child? Or was he simply sharing? Once she asked if he would come watch her speech competition at school, because she had practiced for almost 2 months. A speech about how history is written by winners, and she thought maybe if Daniel heard her standing on a stage speaking about truth and perspective, he might remember she had a voice too. Daniel was silent for a beat, then sighed. "That weekend, I promised to take Ben to the coast with everyone. He's been having a hard time adjusting, I need to keep my word to him. You understand, don't you? I'm trying to rebuild stability here." The word cut deep. Emily wanted to ask what about my stability, but she was afraid that if she did, he would say she was making things difficult. So she said, "Okay." He ended with "I love you," and she answered, "I love you too," because if she did not, she would become the cold child in his story. Those words of love felt like postcards sent from a place where she was not allowed to spend the night. Words went to Emily, but time, presents, public pride, recitals, and ball games went to the place he called his second chance. When she was 13, at a family barbecue at Aunt Corinne's house, Emily heard 2 adults whispering near the lemonade table that Laura had been so difficult Daniel could not breathe, that Emily clung to her mother and pushed him away, that poor Daniel needed to feel needed too. Someone else said Daniel looked lighter now that he was with Marion, that maybe everyone deserved to live honestly after years of enduring. Emily stood near the cookie tray, holding a paper plate, her face burning though the weather was not hot. Later, Corinne pulled her beneath the maple tree, placed a hand on her shoulder and said gently, "You should call your father more. He's hurting too, even if he doesn't say it. Men need to feel needed." Emily was 13. She could not drive, could not file taxes, was not allowed to watch grown-up movies. But she had been given the responsibility of making a 40-year-old man feel needed. She nodded because that was what she had learned. When adults said something unfair in a gentle voice, children often mistook it for morality. That night she did not tell Laura. She was afraid her mother would hurt, afraid her mother would be silent, afraid that if she repeated Corinne's words, they would become even more real. From then on, Emily began calling Daniel first on some Sundays, sometimes only to prove she was not distant. If he did not answer, she left a short, cheerful voicemail. "Hi, Dad, just calling to see how you are. Nothing important. Nothing important." She used that phrase so often it became a small room she locked herself inside. Nothing important when he missed her competition. Nothing important when he sent a birthday card late. Nothing important when Sophie posted a photo of Daniel taking her dress shopping for a dance while Emily went dress shopping with Laura, both of them standing in a fitting room under white lights. Laura asking whether the blue dress was okay, and Emily nodding though there was a stone in her throat. Nothing important was how she cut her feelings into pieces small enough to swallow, so no one would have to say she was hard to love. From then on, Emily began trying to become an easy daughter, as seriously as someone learns an instrument. No one told her directly, but she understood the rules. When Daniel called, she did not ask questions that made him sigh. When she visited his new house, she brought a gift for Marion, smiled at Sophie, played board games with Ben, and washed dishes after dinner like a good guest. Marion treated Emily at first with politeness mixed with caution, the caution of a woman who had heard too much about the distant daughter influenced by her mother. So when Emily was well-behaved, Marian seemed both relieved and suspicious. Sophie was not cruel. She was Emily's age, a little awkward, fond of piano, pretty dresses, and being driven to recitals by Daniel. Sophie's lack of cruelty made it hurt more. If Sophie had been mean, Emily could have hated her. But Sophie was just another child who also needed a father, except she was the one who received him. Ben was younger, sweet, attached to Daniel in a way that made Daniel bloom. "Danny, look at this," he would call, and Daniel would turn immediately. Emily had once called Dad from the foot of the stairs in the old house and heard him say, "1 minute." And that minute had stretched all the way into now. Once, after dinner, Daniel saw Emily wiping the table and loading plates neatly into the dishwasher. He placed a hand on her shoulder, proud, as though he had discovered she was no longer a burden. "You're so much more grown-up now, Em. I'm proud to see you trying." That sentence became a reward. More grown-up meant not asking why he missed her competition. More grown-up meant smiling in the new house. More grown-up meant not making him feel guilty. She began to understand love as something given when she made herself small, light, easy to place in any room without bumping into furniture. One autumn weekend, Daniel invited her to sleep over. Emily prepared too carefully, folding clothes into a duffel bag, packing books, a toothbrush, her nicest pajamas, and a small stuffed animal she removed at the last minute because she was afraid Sophie would see it and think she was childish. Daniel and Marian's house was brighter than the old one. It smelled like waffles and lavender detergent. Family photos lined the staircase. Daniel and Marian at the beach, Daniel teaching Ben to fish, Daniel standing behind Sophie at her middle school graduation, all four of them in Hawaii, sun-browned, wearing leis. Emily walked slowly past those frames, searching for herself as if looking for her name on a list where she had been left out. There were no photos of her, not one birthday picture, not one childhood photo, not even an old family photo preserved out of courtesy. The staircase told a story in which Daniel had begun being a father only after entering Marian's house. The room reserved for Emily was a temporary office, with a computer desk, filing shelves, a printer, and a pull-out sofa. Marian pulled a blanket from a plastic bag in the closet and apologized for the house being cramped. Emily smiled and said it was fine. That night Sophie came in, looked at Emily's bag, and said by accident, "I thought Uncle Daniel only had us in this house." Sophie was not being cruel. She was only repeating the emotional architecture of the house. Emily said it was fine, because she had said that so many times it had become her second language. That night she lay on the pull-out sofa, the blanket smelling faintly of new plastic, listening to Daniel, Marian, Sophie, and Ben laughing downstairs in the kitchen. On the office wall there was Daniel's calendar, Marian's certificates, and nothing to prove Emily had ever existed except the duffel bag on the floor. Near midnight, she heard Daniel walking down the hallway and stopping outside the office door. Her heart beat fast. She thought he would open it, ask if she was okay, realize this was not a daughter's room. But he stood there only a few seconds, then walked away. The next morning, he made pancakes for everyone, asked Sophie if she had slept well because she had rehearsal, reminded Ben to bring a jacket, and then turned to Emily last. "Did you sleep okay?" She said yes. He smiled, satisfied, as though she had passed a test. An easy daughter is one who does not need her own room. Emily's teenage years passed in a tiring effort not to resemble what Daniel had implied she was. She joined the debate club, but apologized after every time she spoke too sharply. She wrote essays so strong that teachers encouraged her to go into editing. But in life, she was always afraid of correcting anyone too firmly. She learned to read adult faces, learned to recognize a sigh before it became blame, learned to change the subject when Laura looked too long at a bill, learned to tell Daniel she understood even when she understood nothing except that she had been placed outside. At school, people thought she was quiet, mature, easygoing. She did not talk about home, not because there was no story, but because Daniel had already told. When your story has been told by someone with a calmer voice, every time you speak afterward, it sounds like defense. Laura remained quiet, still working part-time as an accountant, taking extra files during tax season, buying discounted groceries, keeping the house clean, paying bills on time, never speaking badly of Daniel. Some evenings Emily came home to find her mother asleep at the kitchen table beside piles of paperwork, her glasses low on her nose, the stove light falling across her tired face. Emily would drape a coat over her shoulders and stand there a moment, both loving her and resenting her. Loving her because she stayed, resenting her because she stayed and did not speak. When Emily asked why she did not tell Karen the truth, Laura said she did not want Emily pulled into it. When Emily asked what the truth was, Laura said someday Emily would understand more. Emily hated that sentence. Someday you'll understand more did not help a child survive today. When she was 17, Daniel canceled her birthday dinner because Ben was sick before an important baseball game. He sent a long, kind message saying he knew she was disappointed. But Ben needed him, and he hoped Emily understood that adult hearts could be pulled in many directions. Laura had made pasta, bought a small cake, and lit candles on the table. The cake had white frosting and a few strawberries, not as pretty as one from an expensive bakery. But Laura had bought the kind Emily liked. Emily read the message and let out a dry laugh. Ben needs Dad. I guess I don't. Laura set down a plate and said softly that Emily was allowed to be angry. That should have comforted her. But instead it made Emily's anger flare like flame finding dry curtains. Allowed to be angry for what? You're never angry. You just stay silent. You let Dad tell his story to everyone. You let them think you're cold. You let them think I'm distant. You let me guess. Maybe Dad left because you never say anything. Maybe you really did make this house cold. As soon as the words left her mouth, Emily saw Laura's face change. Not dramatically, just as if something inside her had finally been set down. Laura looked at her daughter for a long time and said, "You think I didn't fight?" Emily wanted to take it back, but 17 is cruel because it knows it has caused pain before it knows how to stop. "I don't know," she said, her voice shaking from anger and fear. "You never let me know anything." Laura stood very still. "I gave you a house where you didn't have to hear me curse your father every night. And in exchange, I got a house full of questions." That sentence was more brutal than she meant it to be. Laura did not argue after that. She turned back to the kitchen, turned off the stove, and put the birthday cake in the refrigerator. That night, Emily heard her mother crying in the bathroom, very quietly, the faucet running to hide it. And for the first time, she understood that Daniel's story had not only hurt her, it had placed a knife in her hand, and she had used it without realizing against the only person who had stayed. The next morning, a slice of birthday cake sat on the kitchen table, wrapped in plastic, with a note beside it in Laura's handwriting. "I'm sorry I didn't know how to make you hurt less." Emily held that note for a long time. She did not apologize right away. Some mistakes made by the wounded take time, before one has enough courage to call them mistakes. The first piece of evidence appeared before Emily left for college, inside an old cardboard box in Laura's closet. They were cleaning because Laura wanted to repaint the bedroom. A small task that felt to Emily like trying to change the color of a room that had held too much silence. The box fell from the top shelf, its lid popping open, papers spilling across the floor. Receipts, bank letters, legal documents, a few printed emails, things Laura had kept but never used as weapons. Emily bent to gather them, and saw an email Daniel had sent to a lawyer almost 3 months before the night of the envelope on the dining table. In it, he asked about division of assets, visitation schedules, and the phrase that made her hands go cold. "If I move in with someone else." If I move in with someone else. 3 months before he said he had reached his limit, before he said he had no choice, before Laura had even been allowed to know for sure. Emily turned over another page and found a hotel receipt from Beaverton, dated one of the nights Daniel had claimed to be at a late meeting. Laura had written a note in the margin. He said church meeting. Beneath that was the date Laura called the church office and learned there had been no meeting that night. Another email Daniel had sent Karen read, "I don't want people thinking I gave up, but you know how Laura is. She'll turn everything into my fault." Emily's chest tightened. Daniel had written about Laura's reaction before Laura even had the chance to react. He had built the wall before pushing them into it. Laura stepped into the room, saw the paper in Emily's hand, and for one instant her face lost its calm. "Give it to me," she said. Emily held on. "You knew." Laura did not answer at once. "You knew Dad had planned it before. Emily, you don't need to carry this." "I've been carrying it, Mom. Since I was 12. I just didn't know its name." Laura placed a hand on the closet frame as if she needed balance. "I didn't want you to read these things and hate your father." Emily laughed, but the sound was like paper tearing. "You think I didn't hate anyone because I didn't have proof?" "No, Mom. I hated myself." That made Laura tremble. She sat on the edge of the bed, the same bed Daniel had slept in for years before calling the house a place where he was dying. "I was wrong," she said very softly. "I thought silence was how I kept poison away from you. I didn't know silence could be poison too." That night, Emily went upstairs, opened her old inbox, and searched for emails Daniel had sent over the years. "I love you. I hope you understand. I don't want to make this hard for you. I'm trying to rebuild. Placed beside the lawyer email, those sentences changed meaning. She began to understand what she would chase for the rest of her life. A sentence does not speak only through its word. It speaks through what has been left out. College took Emily away from the old house, but it did not take her out of Daniel's story. She studied literature and editing in Eugene, choosing that field partly because she loved books, partly because she was haunted by the way a single shifted comma could turn a victim into a cause. In classes on textual analysis, she was good at identifying unreliable narrators. Friends laughed because she could argue for 20 minutes about how a character had deceived himself through 3 sentences describing a room. No one knew she was not arguing with the character. She was arguing with Daniel. She wrote an essay on the silences inside family memory and received a high mark with the professor writing in the margin, "Sharp, emotionally restrained." Emily stared at that note for a long time. She had been praised for keeping feeling from spilling onto the page, the way Daniel once praised her for being grown-up when she washed dishes in his new house. She fell in love with Noah during her 2nd year. Noah was gentle and quiet, studying biology, the kind of person who brought her tea when she stayed up late reading manuscripts, who did not try to fix her, who did not ask too much when she went silent. Because he was not like Daniel, she panicked even more when he needed space. If Noah answered a text late, she reread the conversation, searching for fault in her tone. If he said he needed one evening alone to study, she apologized for bothering him even though he had not said she had. If he sighed because he was tired, she immediately asked whether she had done something wrong. She tried to become a girlfriend who did not demand, did not pressure, did not make anyone feel suffocated. One night, after she sent 3 apology texts simply because he had not replied for 2 hours, Noah came to her dorm room. He sat on the edge of the bed, hands between his knees, looking at her helplessly. "You're always afraid I'm going to leave, Emily. I don't know what to do with that fear." She reacted sharply, saying he did not understand, that she did not need pity, that if he wanted to leave, he should just leave. And immediately she saw herself as a 12-year-old pulling away from Daniel's hand at the dinner table. Noah did not leave right away. He stayed a few more months, but they both knew there was a third person in the relationship. A man named Daniel who was not present but still sat between them, inspecting every sentence, every silence. Maya Reynolds, her college best friend, blunt enough to hurt her sometimes, sat with her on the dorm steps after she and Noah broke up. Maya listened to everything. She did not say Noah was terrible. She did not say Emily deserved better. She only said, "You're dating the present but reacting to your father." Emily hated that sentence at first. "Don't turn everything into trauma," she said. Maya shrugged. "I'm not turning it into anything. He already did that. I'm just naming it." That sentence stayed with her. Daniel was no longer there, but his narrative still controlled the way she loved. She kept trying to prove she was not cold, not difficult, not the reason anyone would leave. The harder she tried, the more she allowed a man who had left long ago to keep his hand around her throat. Daniel missed Emily's college graduation because Ben had a state baseball final. He called 2 days before, regret in his voice, saying he had tried to rearrange things, but Ben was in an important game. Marion could not handle all the logistics alone, and though he knew Emily would understand, he still felt terrible. "I'll send flowers," he said. "I'm proud of you, Em. You know that," she said okay. On graduation day, Laura sat in the audience wearing an old navy dress ironed perfectly, holding a camera, crying when Emily's name was called. Karen sent a congratulatory text with a flower emoji. Daniel sent flowers to the dorm with a card, "Proud of you always." That same day, Marion posted a photo of Daniel standing beside Ben in his baseball uniform, sunlight on Daniel's face, and Daniel's shared caption read, "Wouldn't miss this for the world." Emily looked at the flowers on the table and then at the post on her phone. She understood the real message more clearly than any spoken words. Daniel could show up for important things. She was simply no longer on the list of things that were important. If she reacted, he would say she was selfish, that he could not be in 2 places at once, that he loved her but life was complicated. So she did not react. She put the flowers in a vase, took a picture and texted thank you, then went into the dorm bathroom and cried alone, turning on the faucet so her roommate would not hear. Later, as an editor, she would become obsessed with captions. A short sentence could hide so many tiny corpses. "Second chances. Proud of you always. Wouldn't miss this for the world." Sometimes the most beautiful sentences are where people hide their cruelest choices. After college, Emily returned to Portland not because she wanted to be near all of it, but because she was hired by a small publishing house specializing in nonfiction and local memoir. A low-paying job that placed her exactly where she could do the strangest work of her life: revise other people's stories until they became more honest. The publishing office was inside an old brick building, its hallway smelling of paper, dust, and cold coffee, its windows looking out onto a street that always seemed wet. Emily liked arriving early, turning on her desk lamp, opening a manuscript, holding a red pen, and reading each line like someone searching for landmines. She disliked passages where authors made themselves too cleanly heroic. She always asked, "Who else was in the room here? Does the person you mention get to speak? Is this sentence explaining or avoiding responsibility?" Her boss, a woman in her 50s named Joan, once said Emily had a gift for hearing what a paragraph had left out. Emily smiled and called it an occupational habit. But it was not. It was a life. During those years, her relationship with Daniel became thin, polite, almost administrative. He sent birthday texts. She answered thank you. He invited her to Thanksgiving at Marion's house. She usually said she was busy, sometimes because she was, sometimes because she did not have the strength to stand in the house with the staircase of photos that did not include her. Laura did not speak of Daniel often, but the silence between mother and daughter had changed, less dark now, though not fully warm. Some nights, Emily visited the old house, and the two of them ate soup at the kitchen table while rain tapped the windows. And Laura told small stories about Daniel from before, not to excuse him, but to place the truth in its proper complexity. "Your father used to be a joyful man," she said once. "He wasn't always like that." Emily looked at her. "That makes it harder," Laura nodded. "I know. A betrayer who once had goodness in him is a more brutal kind of loss. If Daniel had always been evil, the beautiful memories would have been easier to erase. But he had taught Emily to ride a bike, made rabbit-shaped pancakes, sat in the living room listening to the first poem she ever wrote, told her she had a very particular eye for the world. Those memories did not disappear when the truth came out. They only became sharper objects. Emily slowly understood that losing a father was not only losing his present. It was losing the right to trust the beautiful memories without cutting her hands on them. Years later, Daniel's marriage to Marion began to crack, and that crack opened a door Emily had not expected. Marion's first call came on a rainy afternoon while Emily was at the publishing office, surrounded by the smell of new paper and cold coffee, the screen in front of her showing a manuscript by a man writing about how he had left a toxic marriage, while never once giving his ex-wife a line of dialogue. Emily saw Marion's name on her phone and thought it must be a mistake. Marion did not call to apologize. Not yet. Her voice was tired and careful, like someone entering a room she once thought she would never need to enter. "Emily, I know this is strange, but I wanted to ask, did your mother ever get told by Daniel that she was too sensitive?" Emily was silent. Outside the window, rain drew fine lines down the glass. Marion inhaled slowly. "He tells me I make this house tense, that he needs to breathe, that he's tried for so long. I hear those things and..." She stopped. "I suddenly think I've heard them before, even if not with my own ears." Emily stood from her desk and walked into the back hallway, near the photocopier and recycling bin. She did not feel victorious. She felt cold. The pattern had repeated. Daniel had not left the old family because Laura was too cold or Emily too distant. He left any place that began asking him to take responsibility, then built a story in which that place suffocated him. Marion said he had begun calling friends, saying she was controlling. Sophie no longer respected him. Ben had been influenced by his mother. The old sentences wore new names. "I'm not saying I was innocent in everything," Marion said, her voice hardening for a second, as if she still wanted to hold on to a little dignity. "I wasn't always easy to live with. But he's writing you before you get to speak," Emily said. Marion went quiet. In that silence, two women stood at opposite ends of the same story. One had once been used as proof that the man had found peace. The other had once believed she was that peace, until it became her turn to be called the suffocating house. Marion did not immediately become an ally. She still defended herself, still said Emily did not know everything about the past, still avoided the part where she had believed Daniel too easily. But that call placed a key fragment in Emily's hand. For the first time, the woman who had once stood in the replacement frame could see the man outside the frame holding the pen and writing the story the same way all over again. After the call, Emily returned to her desk, looked at the manuscript on her screen, and for the first time in her life typed a comment with shaking hands. The narrator may be omitting the cost paid by others. Aunt Karen was the next to unlock something, though she did it slowly and with pain. Karen had defended Daniel for years. She had told Emily to call her father more, had said Laura was difficult, had believed her brother had endured. But when Marian's marriage began to crack, Karen started to feel something terribly familiar. Emily never knew exactly what changed Karen's mind. Maybe Daniel called one evening and spoke about Marian in the same voice he had once used for Laura. Maybe Sophie, now grown, cried in Karen's kitchen and said, "I don't understand why Uncle Daniel makes everything sound like Mom's fault." Maybe age loosened the glue holding together the stories people used to survive. One evening, Karen emailed Emily with the subject line, "You should have these." There was no long introduction. Attached was a chain of emails Daniel had sent Karen before the divorce. Emily opened them one by one in her small Portland apartment, her hands so cold she had to set down her cup of tea. Daniel had written, weeks before the envelope night, "I need people to understand how long I've been enduring this. Laura will turn this into me betraying her, but the truth is the marriage has been dead for years." Another email said, "If Laura reacts strongly, it will only prove what I've been saying. I'm afraid Emily will be pulled into her mother's bitterness." Another said, "Marian reminds me what peace feels like. I don't want to be punished just because I found a place that doesn't make me feel wrong for existing." Emily read the sentence, "If Laura reacts strongly, it will only prove what I've been saying again and again." Daniel had not simply told the story after leaving. He had prepared a way to make Laura's pain into evidence against her. He had anticipated the wounded person's response, then built a frame where that response could be used as the reason he had to go. This was no longer weakness, no longer a tired man losing his way. This was method. Karen called afterward, crying. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't know." Emily sat on her living room floor, laptop open in front of her. "You didn't know because you didn't ask my mother," she answered, not yelling, but her voice cold enough to silence Karen. "You asked Dad," Karen cried harder. "He was my brother. My mother was the one left behind. I thought I was helping the family." Emily looked at the emails on the screen. "No, you were helping Dad's story have an audience." The sentence was cruel. She knew, but sometimes the truth has to be sharp enough to cut through the soft fabric of apologies that arrived too late. Karen did not argue. Perhaps it was the first time Emily saw an adult from the old system not try to place their own pain above hers. After the call, Emily printed every email, not knowing what she would do with them, only knowing she did not want them to exist only as files that could be deleted. She placed them in a gray folder and wrote one word on the outside, "Sequence." Not dad, not divorce, not proof, only sequence. Because Daniel had survived by scrambling time, placing reaction before cause, placing his pain before his action. The only way to answer him was to put everything back in the right order. Laura fell mildly ill in the winter when Emily was 28. A bout of pneumonia that forced her to take several weeks off work. Emily came back to the old house to care for her mother, sleeping in her childhood room, where the walls had been painted another color, but morning light still fell into the same corner. The house looked smaller to her adult eyes, but heavier too, like an aging body that had held too many rainy seasons in its wood. The world's okayest dad mug still sat on the high shelf behind a few other cups. Emily had thought of throwing it away many times. Laura had never used it either, but neither of them had done it. Some objects remain not because anyone wants to keep them, but because no one has found the right ritual for letting them go. One rainy night, while Emily was making ginger tea in the kitchen, Laura called her over and handed her a small brown note. "I think you should read this," she said. It was not a dramatic diary, not pages of long, bitter paragraphs, only dry notes written by date. The day Daniel came home late. The day Laura found the hotel receipt. The day Daniel said he needed space. The day Laura suggested marriage counseling. The day Daniel refused and said therapy would only make things more toxic. The day Laura called the law office and learned Daniel had already consulted them. The day Karen called to say Daniel was hurting and Laura needed to look at herself. The day Daniel told relatives Laura did not want to save the marriage, even though he had been the one to refuse therapy. There were also small lines about Emily. Em stood in the hallway listening to us argue. Daniel looked at her when he said he didn't mean to. She nodded. "I hate myself for not pulling her out of that." Emily asked, "If Dad loves me, why did he leave?" I couldn't answer. I was afraid if I told the truth, I would make her lose her father. I didn't understand he was already gone. Emily read in the old kitchen, the smell of ginger tea around them, rain damp on the porch outside, the heater humming steadily. Laura sat across from her, smaller in a gray sweater, her hands thinner after the illness. "Why didn't you show me this sooner?" Emily asked, but her voice did not hold the anger it had when she was 17. It was only tired. Laura looked down at her hands. "Because you were 12, then 13, then 17. I kept thinking that if I spoke, I would put hatred inside you. I didn't want your father to take that from you too. But he took it another way. I know. You let me think maybe I was the reason." Laura closed her eyes, one tear falling onto the back of her hand. "I know, no defense, no self-rescue. Only I know." And that lack of self-rescue was so different from Daniel that it hurt Emily. Daniel always needed a story he could live with. Laura was willing to sit inside an ugly sentence if it was true. Emily cried, not loudly. The tears simply moved down her face. "I said such cruel things to you." Laura reached across the table and placed her hand over Emily's. "You were a child left in a room where no one turned on the light. I have some blame in that darkness too." Emily shook her head, but Laura squeezed her hand. "No, let me have my part. Your father took too much by turning everything into someone else's fault. I don't want to do the opposite and call myself a saint." That made Emily cry harder. It was something Daniel had never done. Claim his part without using it to ask for immediate forgiveness. That night, mother and daughter sat in the kitchen until nearly 2 in the morning. They did not resolve a childhood. They did not heal everything in one conversation. But for the first time, the truth was no longer standing outside the door. Laura told her about the days when she wanted to call Karen and scream, but then saw Emily doing homework at the table and told herself she could not turn her child into a battlefield. Emily told her about the sofa room in Daniel's house, about Sophie's sentence, about the "wouldn't miss this for the world" caption. Laura cried when she heard that, not from surprise, but because she was finally able to see one of her daughter's wounds without trying to bandage it too quickly. Before going to sleep, Emily took the "World's Okayest Dad" mug down from the shelf. Laura looked at her. "Do you want to throw it away?" Emily held the mug in her hands, her thumb moving over the slightly faded words. "Not yet," she said. "I want it in the folder." Laura did not understand immediately, but nodded. The next day, Emily placed the mug in a box with printed emails, a copy of the notebook pages, screenshots of captions, and the hotel receipt. Not to sue, not for revenge, so memory would no longer be fogged. Daniel returned when he was in his 60s, after his marriage to Marion had fallen apart, and his relationships with Sophie and Ben had cooled in the ordinary way adult children drift from the people who raised them. Sophie moved to Seattle, built a life of her own, and posted fewer pictures with him. Ben got married and called Daniel when he needed something fixed, or when guilt reminded him he had not called in a while. Marion no longer kept a frame open for Daniel to stand inside. Daniel sent Emily an email with the subject line, "Can we talk?" He wrote that he had been thinking a lot, that aging made people look back, that he wanted to repair things, wanted his daughter back. The sentences were softer than they had been years ago, but they still slid around responsibility like water around stone. "I was trapped in a difficult situation. I was hurting too. I think your mother made you more distant from me than I understood at the time." Emily read the email in her Portland apartment, where she lived alone, with shelves full of manuscripts, a small plant on the sill, and photos she had chosen to hang for no one but herself. She recognized the pattern still alive. Daniel wanted forgiveness without naming what he had done. He wanted to return as the aging, remorseful father, but he was still carrying the old pen, ready to edit the story if he could. Maya, by then her closest friend of many years, read the email when Emily handed her the phone in a cafe. Maya frowned. "He doesn't ask what you need." Emily looked out the window, where rain fell on cars parked along the curb. "He says he wants his daughter back." "Right, that's what he needs." Emily gave a small, humorless smile. "Do you think I should see him?" Maya did not answer right away. "Do you want to see him so he understands, or so you can stop waiting for him to understand?" That question stayed. Emily agreed to see Daniel, but not over private coffee where he could use a soft voice and red eyes to draw her into a private room of his narrative. She suggested Aunt Karen's house, with Laura, Karen, Marion, and Sophie present. Not for revenge, but so no one could keep saying everyone remembered differently. Daniel hesitated. "I don't want to turn this into a trial," he said over the phone. Emily stood in her apartment kitchen, looking at the box that held the old mug. "Neither do I. A trial has a judge. This is just a room with people your story touched." He was silent. "Emily, I'm afraid you're coming with a lot of anger." "I'm coming with sequence." He did not understand or did not want to. The meeting took place on a gray Sunday afternoon, rain falling just enough to blur Karen's windows. Karen still spread a white tablecloth, set out glasses of water with slowly melting ice, and made roast chicken as if food could dull the edge of confrontation. Laura arrived in a black coat, her face calm but her hand tight around her bag. Marion came alone, her hair cut shorter than before, her face tired but clear. Sophie arrived after her, now a grown woman, wearing a cream sweater with the expression of someone unsure whether she had any right to be in the room. Daniel arrived last in a brown coat, his hair much grayer, his shoulders slightly bent, but his voice still lovely, still calm. He hugged Karen, nodded to Marion, greeted Laura with excessive politeness, then looked at Emily longer. "You look like your mother," he said. Years ago, that sentence might have frightened her, because in Daniel's mouth, being like Laura had meant cold, difficult, distant. Now Emily answered, "Thank you." Daniel paused, then smiled sadly. They sat around the table. Ice melted in the glasses. No one touched the chicken. Daniel began with the familiar line, "I just hope everyone can understand that back then I felt I had no choice." Emily looked at him, then opened the folder in front of her. She was not shaking as much as she had thought she would. Onto the table she placed the timeline, the lawyer email from before the envelope night, the hotel receipt, the email to Karen, Laura's notebook, the second chances post, the proof of Daniel showing up for Sophie and Ben's milestones while missing Emily's, and his recent email still saying Laura had made Emily distant from him. She did not yell. She spoke very slowly. "You had choices. You chose to leave. You chose to meet with a lawyer before telling Mom. You chose to tell Aunt Karen that if Mom reacted strongly, it would prove you right. You chose to call this house a place where you were dying while still letting me sit at a dinner table. And here you tell me it wasn't my fault. You chose to stand behind Sophie in that piano photo, chose to watch Ben play baseball, chose to write 'Wouldn't miss this for the world' on the day I graduated. You didn't just leave this family. You made us carry the blame so your choice could look clean." Daniel went pale. Karen cried, her hand trembling on her napkin. Marion looked down at the table, both hands clasped. Sophie stared at the old photo on the table, where Daniel stood behind her at the piano. Her face changed very slowly. Maybe for the first time she understood that a photo that had once made her happy could also be evidence of someone else's pain. Daniel tried to recover his voice. "Emily, you're gathering separate pieces to create a very cruel story. I learned from you." That sentence drained the air from the room. Daniel looked at her, his eyes reddening, whether from pain or from losing control, she could not tell. "I was hurting," he said. "I really was hurting. My marriage with your mother." Laura lifted her head. "Don't," she said, one small word, but the strongest Emily had ever heard her mother say to him. Daniel looked at Laura as if betrayed because she had dared to enter her own story. "I'm not trying to blame you." Marion gave a very small, wounded laugh. "You always say that right before you blame someone." Sophie looked at her mother. Karen covered her mouth. Daniel looked around and realized the room no longer stood in the old order. Karen was no longer the person who listened to him with automatic sympathy. Marion was no longer proof that he had found peace. Sophie was no longer the child in the frame. Laura was no longer silent because she feared poisoning her daughter. And Emily was no longer the child who wanted to be praised for being grown up. He said, "I'm sorry" at last, but the apology still revolved around his own pain. "I didn't know how else to do it. I'm only human. I was afraid. I felt that if I stayed, I would become bitter." Emily looked at him and understood he might regret the consequences, but not necessarily the method. "You didn't lose this family," she said. "You chose to leave it, then made us carry the blame for your choice." Daniel lowered his head. For the first time, he had no beautiful answer. But that silence did not heal. It only confirmed what Emily already knew. The truth can stand up in the middle of a dining table, but it cannot hold the 12-year-old child. It cannot go back to the rainy night and remove the envelope from the table. It can only make the adult stop, pretending the envelope appeared there by itself. After that meeting, nothing became clean. Karen sent Laura a handwritten apology, then called Emily a few times, each time trying not to defend herself but sometimes slipping into, "I didn't know how to believe my brother could." And Emily would have to say, "You don't need to tell me how hard it is for you to believe it." Marion and Laura met once in a coffee shop, a meeting no one knew how to name. Not friendship, not reconciliation. Two women who had once been placed at opposite ends of Daniel's story sat at the same table, talking about the similar sentences he had used, about what it felt like to be called tense when one was only in pain. Sophie sent Emily a long message, apologizing for the sentence she had said years earlier in the office room, even though Emily had never told her how much it hurt. "I didn't know," Sophie wrote. "I really didn't know." Emily looked at the message for a long time and replied, "I know." She did not add "it's okay," because "it's okay" is the cheapest lie wounded people use to make others feel lighter. 2 days later, Sophie texted again. She said she had opened her mother's old photo album and found the piano picture, the one where Daniel stood behind her with his hand on her shoulder. The picture she had always liked, because it made her feel like she had a father in the back row. "I spent my whole life seeing it as a good memory," Sophie wrote. "Now I look at it and think maybe you were waiting for him somewhere at the same time." Emily read the message in her apartment while Portland rain fell outside as usual. She did not want Sophie to carry Daniel's guilt, but she did not want to soften the wound with "it's okay" either. She wrote back, "You didn't do that." "But yes, I was waiting," Sophie answered after a long while. "I'm sorry I was in that picture." Emily stared at that line and felt another kind of pain, less like a knife and more like a stone. "Don't apologize for being a child," she replied. "The adults were the ones choosing the frame." Sophie did not answer again. Maybe she was crying. Maybe she was looking at the photo and understanding for the first time that being chosen by a man like Daniel did not necessarily mean being loved cleanly. Sometimes it meant being placed inside a story that was useful to him at the time. That same week, Daniel emailed Emily. It was not long, not crude. Its lack of crudeness made it cold. He wrote that he had been thinking a lot after the meeting, that he was sorry Emily still carried so much anger, that he hoped one day she would be able to distinguish between the truth and the way Laura had taught her to see him with unforgiving eyes. He said his door would always be open, even if she was not ready to stop punishing him. Emily read the email once. Then she read the phrase, "unforgiving eyes," again. The pattern was still alive. Even after being placed before the timeline, he was still trying to frame her feelings inside the old labels. Angry, unforgiving, influenced by Laura. Emily set the phone down on the table. She did not reply, not because she had nothing to say, because she had already said it in a room with enough witnesses. Daniel wanted to pull her back into the old game where he threw out a sentence. She had to react, and then her reaction became evidence. This time, she let his sentence fall to the floor without picking it up. That same evening, Laura came home, hung her coat on the hook, made a cup of tea, and sat at the kitchen table. The brown notebook was in the drawer. She opened it and looked at the old lines for a long time. Rain tapped softly outside. She did not cry. She did not read further. She did not add another line. After a few minutes, Laura closed the notebook, rested her hand on the cover as if placing her palm on a door now locked from the right side, and pushed it back into the drawer. That silence was not like the silence of years before. It was not silence because she feared Daniel would write first. It was not silence meant to protect Emily from the truth. It was silence after the truth had been spoken. And for the first time, Laura did not have to use her voice to fight a story that no longer had the right to stand alone. A year later, Daniel came to Emily's Portland apartment with an old box of photographs in his hands. He did not give much warning, only texted that he had a few things he wanted to bring over, and Emily, after a very long pause, agreed to meet him at the door. The day was cold, the sky a pale gray, the apartment hallway smelling of old carpet and floor cleaner. Daniel stood outside her door, older than he had looked at Karen's house, his shoulders more bent, holding the photo box like a man carrying proof that the past had once held beautiful moments. Emily looked at the box. She knew it might contain pictures of her sitting on his shoulders at Cannon Beach, pictures of her missing front teeth, pictures of him teaching her to ride a bike, pictures of the three of them in front of a Christmas tree, objects real enough to make any sentence like, "I did love you," impossible to reject completely. Daniel said he found them while clearing things out. Marion had sold their old house after the separation. Sophie did not want to keep much. Ben had taken a few fishing rods, and Emily's old photographs, strangely, had been sitting in a box in the garage. "I thought you should have them," he said. Emily understood that part of him wanted this gift to become a key. Not deliberately cruel. Maybe he really did feel old, lonely, afraid of dying without anyone left to call him Dad in the old way. That was what made the moment hurt more. Daniel was no longer the 40-year-old man, sitting upright in front of a white envelope. He was older now, losing the audience for his story, returning with a box of photos and a soft voice. "I want to start again," he said. "Not like before. I know it can't be like before. But, Sunday dinners, a phone call, seeing each other sometime. I want to be your father while there's still time." Emily looked at him, at the box, at the man who had chosen to stand in the frame of another family, then returned when those frames no longer opened to him the way they used to. The fiercest part of her anger had passed, leaving a cold clarity behind. "I spent so many years trying to stop waiting for you to step into my life," she said. "I can't reopen that place just because you feel empty now." Daniel looked at her, his eyes filling with red. "So there's no room for me anymore?" Years ago, that question might have killed her. She had lived to prove there was room, that she was lovable enough to be kept, that if she was easier, warmer, less wounded, he would see her. Now she only saw a very sad truth. "It's not that there's no room," she said. "It's that you left it for too long." He trembled slightly, the photo box already in her hands. "I don't know what to do with that." "I know," Emily said. "I lived with that feeling longer than you have." Daniel closed his eyes, and for 1 second she saw the father who had read stories to her, who had made rabbit-shaped pancakes, who had laughed when he received the world's okayest dad mug. She saw all of it and still did not open the door. That was the most brutal part of growing up. Not that love had vanished, but that love was no longer enough to make her betray herself. Daniel stood outside the door one more beat, as if waiting for her to change her mind, as if part of him still believed the daughter who once sat through Sunday phone calls would find a way to make this moment hurt less for him. Emily did not. She closed the door very gently, not like revenge, but like a final boundary. In the quiet apartment, she set the photo box on the table and did not open it right away. Outside the window, Portland rain fell in a fine mist, the same kind of rain that had covered the night of the white envelope on the dining table. The truth had returned to her, but it did not return her childhood. It did not place Daniel in the audience at her speech competition. It did not bring him to her graduation. It did not erase the nights she slept on the sofa in the office of his new house. It did not take back the sentence she had said to Laura when she was 17. It only returned to her the right not to live inside his indictment anymore. It was not until evening that Emily opened the box. The first photograph was Cannon Beach. Emily at 8 years old, sitting on Daniel's shoulders, her hair flying wildly, her mouth open in a smile so wide her eyes were nearly closed. She looked at that little girl for a long time. She did not tear the photo, did not burn it, did not put it on a shelf. She slipped it into a new envelope, along with a copy of the timeline, Daniel's letter, and a blank sheet of paper on which she wrote very slowly. He was there. Then he chose not to be. That sentence did not make her feel lighter. It was simply true, and sometimes, after a lifetime of being trapped inside someone else's story, true is the only thing solid enough to stand on. Emily placed the envelope in a drawer, turned off the living room light, and let the rain keep tapping against the glass. She survived. Laura survived. Daniel survived too, in his own way, outside a door that did not open. But Emily was no longer the little girl waiting for her father to return with an explanation that would make everything hurt less. She had come to understand that some people come back not because they finally see you, but because the places they once chose are no longer open. And this time, she had the right to close the door.